Anyone caught eating her food again will answer to me. The order echoed through the Bellini mansion with such force that every conversation stopped. Capos, bodyguards, and veteran enforcers froze where they stood. Vincent Bellini rarely repeated himself. His cold eyes swept across the room. What kind of operation makes armed men sneak into a kitchen like thieves? Silence. Until one scarred veteran lowered his head. Boss, we'd rather skip meals than stop eating Mrs. Bellini's cooking. For the first time in years, the most feared mafia boss in America found himself completely speechless. The quiet, plus-size wife he had assumed couldn't even prepare dinner had somehow earned the unwavering loyalty of the hardest men in his empire. How had that happened? Nobody imagined Rose Whitmore Bellini would become invisible so quickly after her wedding. When she first stepped through the towering iron gates of the Bellini estate, she carried only 2 suitcases. One held her clothes. The other contained dozens of weathered notebooks, tied carefully with faded blue ribbons. Inside those notebooks lived generations of family recipes. Every page was covered with handwritten notes from her late grandfather. Never cook to impress people. Cook so they feel remembered. Those words had shaped her entire life. As a little girl, Rose had spent countless afternoons standing beside her grandfather in a warm country kitchen. He never measured ingredients with scales. Instead, he measured emotions. "This soup," he would say, "needs another 5 minutes because your grandmother had a difficult day. The bread isn't finished yet. People can taste whether you're rushing." Long before Rose learned sophisticated recipes, she learned something far more valuable. Food was another language, one that told people they mattered. She had carried that lesson into adulthood. She simply never imagined entering a family where no one seemed interested in hearing it. The Bellini estate looked less like a home than a fortified palace. Marble floors reflected crystal chandeliers. Paintings worth millions lined endless hallways. Armed guards stood at nearly every entrance. Servants moved with practiced silence. Everything functioned according to strict rules. Everything except warmth. Rose noticed it almost immediately. People greeted one another politely. No one truly smiled. Even laughter sounded cautious, as though joy required permission. When Vincent welcomed her into the mansion, he was respectful. He never raised his voice, never insulted her, never treated her cruelly. But neither did he invite her into his world. "Our marriage brings stability to both families," he explained calmly after the ceremony. "I hope you'll be comfortable here." Comfortable. Not happy. Not loved. Not needed. The distinction lingered in Rose's mind. She understood their marriage had begun as an alliance rather than a romance. She didn't expect fairy tales. She only hoped that, given enough time, they might slowly become partners. Instead, she discovered someone else already controlled every corner of the household. Vivian Moretti, Vincent's elegant aunt, manager of the Bellini estate for nearly 20 years. Vivian welcomed Rose with flawless manners. Every compliment sounded polished. Every smile stopped just short of kindness. "We already have experienced staff handling the estate," Vivian said during Rose's first morning. "So please don't concern yourself with household responsibilities." Rose nodded politely. "I'd still love to help where I can." Vivian smiled. "I'm sure you would." The conversation ended there. Over the following weeks, Rose realized every decision flowed through Vivian. Meal planning, guest receptions, holiday traditions, charitable events, even flower arrangements. Whenever Rose offered assistance, Vivian gently redirected her elsewhere. "Oh, that's already been handled. The chefs know what they're doing. The servants have instructions. There isn't anything for you to worry about." At first, Rose believed she simply needed patience. Eventually, an opportunity would come. It never did. Unknown to Rose, Vivian had quietly given another instruction. Under no circumstances was Mrs. Bellini allowed inside the main kitchens. The executive chefs obeyed immediately. When Rose wandered in one afternoon, hoping to bake cookies for the staff, the head chef nearly panicked. "I'm terribly sorry, Mrs. Bellini. Lady Vivian has already prepared today's menu. Perhaps tomorrow." Tomorrow never arrived. The staff felt embarrassed refusing her. Yet nobody dared question Vivian's authority. Rumors soon spread through the estate. Mostly whispered. Never spoken loudly enough for Rose to confront. A woman her size probably enjoys eating more than cooking. "I heard the marriage happened because of politics. She's pleasant enough. But does she actually do anything?" The words drifted through corridors, across gardens, behind half-closed doors. Rose heard more than people realized. She simply pretended she hadn't. Years earlier, her grandfather had offered another lesson. People reveal themselves through the way they treat someone who doesn't fight back. Rose had never forgotten. So she smiled, thanked everyone, learned every employee's name, asked gardeners about their children, remembered birthdays, helped elderly housekeepers carry laundry baskets despite protests that she shouldn't. Nobody noticed those small moments. Nobody except the employees themselves. Even Vincent unintentionally reinforced the distance. One evening he found Rose reading recipes in the library. "You still enjoy cooking?" he asked. She smiled. "I always will." He looked genuinely surprised. "I assumed you wouldn't miss it much. We employ some of the finest chefs in New York." Rose closed the notebook gently. "They're excellent." "I just enjoy making meals myself." Vincent nodded politely. "Well, you shouldn't feel obligated anymore. We have professionals." He meant it as reassurance. Rose accepted it with her usual smile. But after he left, her fingers lingered on the worn leather cover of her grandfather's notebook. For the first time since childhood, she wondered if the one gift she treasured most might never again have a place in her life. The Bellini estate never truly slept. Even after midnight, security vehicles rolled through the grounds, radios crackled with coded messages, armed guards rotated posts beneath dim courtyard lights, while mechanics checked armored SUVs before dawn operations. Everyone had a role, everyone except Rose. She refused to let bitterness become a habit. Each morning she still greeted the gardeners by name. She learned which maid secretly sent half her salary to care for an aging father. She noticed the young chauffeur who always skipped breakfast because he began work before sunrise. None of these observations seemed important. To Rose, they were everything. Her grandfather had once smiled while kneading bread and said, "The first ingredient isn't flour, it's paying attention." So she paid attention. One rainy Thursday, that habit changed everything. Just after 11 o'clock that night, Rose couldn't sleep. The mansion felt unusually restless. Headlights flashed beyond her bedroom window as several black SUVs rolled through the front gates. A dangerous operation had apparently ended. She wandered downstairs, hoping to make herself a cup of tea. Passing near the service corridor, she heard quiet voices. "Kitchen's closed. Chef left hours ago. Guess the leftovers are gone too." She paused. Around the corner stood 6 Bellini soldiers. Their expensive suits were stained with mud. One man's sleeve had been hastily wrapped around a bleeding forearm. Another limped slightly. Their shoulders sagged with exhaustion. They looked nothing like the intimidating enforcers visitors feared. They looked hungry. One younger guard forced a laugh. "I'd eat cardboard at this point." Another opened the industrial refrigerator. Only a few cold containers remained. Half a tray of dry pasta, vegetables already beginning to wilt, some forgotten chicken stock. Nobody complained. Years in the organization had taught them to accept discomfort without question. Rose quietly stepped forward. "If you don't mind waiting." Every head turned. "I think I can make something." The men exchanged uncertain glances. One scratched the back of his neck. "We couldn't ask you to do that, Mrs. Bellini." "You aren't asking." She smiled gently. "I'm offering." None of them knew how to refuse kindness. The kitchen remained strangely peaceful after midnight. For the first time since entering the Bellini family, Rose stood where she had always wanted to be. Not as the Mafia Boss's wife, simply as someone preparing dinner. She rolled up her sleeves, examined every shelf. There wasn't much, but her grandfather used to joke that empty cupboards inspired the best cooks. She found onions, carrots, celery, Parmesan rinds someone had nearly thrown away, fresh herbs growing beside the back window, leftover roasted chicken, a little cream, homemade bread from that morning. Nothing expensive, nothing extraordinary, yet in Rose's hands each ingredient seemed to remember its purpose. The onions caramelized slowly until they released a sweet aroma that drifted through the silent kitchen. Butter melted. Garlic sizzled. Chicken stock simmered into something rich and comforting. She stirred patiently, tasting, adjusting, waiting, never rushing, because comfort couldn't be hurried. The guards watched from the doorway. One whispered, "She's cooking from scratch." Another frowned. At midnight, nobody had seen anything like it inside the Bellini estate. Professional chefs cooked with precision. Rose cooked with affection. There was a difference. Within 40 minutes, steaming bowls covered the long wooden counter. Creamy chicken soup, fresh herb bread toasted with garlic butter, a simple salad brightened with lemon dressing, warm apple slices sautéed with cinnamon for dessert. Rose placed the first bowl before the oldest soldier. "I noticed your wrist. You've been injured. Be careful. It's hot." The veteran stared. Not at the food. At her. Nobody had noticed his injury. Not because people were cruel, because everyone had been busy surviving. He accepted the bowl with both hands. "Thank you, Mrs. Bellini." She shook her head softly. "Please eat before it gets cold." Silence filled the kitchen. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind created when people experience something unexpected. Spoons moved slowly. Then faster. No one spoke for several minutes, until the youngest guard quietly laughed. "I haven't tasted soup like this since I was 12. Another nodded. "My mother used rosemary exactly like this." Someone else smiled despite himself. "The bread. It smells like Sundays." Rose listened without interrupting. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She simply enjoyed watching tired faces soften. The oldest veteran finished every last spoonful, then carefully folded his napkin. His eyes looked suspiciously bright. "My wife passed away 8 years ago." He cleared his throat. "Tonight. This reminded me of eating with her." Rose reached across the table and gently squeezed his hand. "I'm glad she gave you beautiful memories." No grand speech, no dramatic comfort. Just understanding. The men returned to their duties carrying something none of them expected. A full stomach and a strangely lighter heart. The following evening, Rose again wandered into the kitchen after dinner. This time she wasn't surprised to find 3 familiar faces waiting awkwardly near the doorway. One scratched his neck. "We were wondering if you happened to be cooking again." Rose smiled. "I was just about to begin." The next night, 6 men appeared. Then 10. Word spread without anyone intending it to. Drivers who worked 16-hour shifts. Mechanics covered in engine grease. Gardeners finishing before sunrise. Junior capos buried beneath endless responsibilities. Bodyguards returning from dangerous assignments. They arrived quietly, never demanding, never expecting. Simply hoping. Rose never prepared extravagant feasts. She remembered preferences instead. Extra pepper for Marco, because old injuries dulled his taste. Less salt for Anthony after learning about his blood pressure. Vegetarian pasta for one accountant whose daughter had convinced him to stop eating meat. Chocolate pudding on birthdays. Apple pie when someone quietly mentioned missing home. Every detail mattered, because every person mattered. One evening, a nervous young recruit apologized. "I'm probably taking someone else's portion." Rose looked genuinely confused. "I made enough for everyone." He hesitated. "But I'm just a recruit." She handed him another slice of warm bread. "At this table, you're simply someone who's had a long day." The words traveled through the Bellini organization faster than any rumor. Not because the meals were luxurious, because someone inside the mansion finally treated rank as less important than humanity. Soon the soldiers developed their own quiet routine. After finishing assignments, they would check whether the small side kitchen light remained on. If it glowed beneath the window, Mrs. Bellini was cooking, and somehow, no matter how difficult the day had been, everything felt manageable for another night. The changes began so quietly that no one could identify the exact moment the Bellini estate started feeling different. No new rules had been announced. No meetings had been held. No speeches had been given. The only difference was that every evening, long after the mansion's formal dining room had closed, a warm light continued glowing from the small service kitchen near the east courtyard, and people kept finding reasons to pass by. At first, the gatherings remained small. 6 soldiers, then 10, then 15. Rose never invited anyone. She simply cooked enough for whoever arrived. Some nights she made hearty beef stew that simmered for hours. Other evenings she baked herb-roasted chicken with buttery mashed potatoes. On colder nights, enormous pots of tomato soup filled the kitchen with aromas that drifted through nearby hallways. The menu changed constantly. The feeling never did. No matter what appeared on the table, everyone left feeling lighter than when they arrived. Rose possessed an unusual gift. She remembered people, not just their names. Their stories. When Marco entered one evening rubbing his shoulder, she quietly placed a heating pad beside his bowl before he even sat down. The old injury acting up again? Marco blinked. "I never told you that." "You did. 3 weeks ago. You thought nobody was listening." She smiled. "I was." Marco stared at her for a moment before laughing softly. "My own doctor forgets more than you do." Another evening, the estate's youngest mechanic hesitated near the doorway. Rose noticed immediately. "You look worried." He forced a smile. "My daughter's starting school tomorrow. I promised I'd be there, but I might get called into work." Rose disappeared briefly into the pantry. She returned, carrying 2 neatly wrapped cinnamon rolls. "One for your daughter, one for you. Tell her someone believes she's going to have a wonderful first day." The mechanic swallowed hard. Nobody in the organization knew he had a daughter. He had kept family separate from mafia business for years. Yet somehow, Mrs. Bellini had remembered. Soon the conversations stretched longer than the meals. Bodyguards who barely exchanged words during security shifts suddenly debated baseball. Drivers shared childhood stories. Gardeners teased accountants. Junior capos listened respectfully to elderly veterans. Arguments that once ended with shouting now dissolved over steaming bowls of homemade pasta. It became impossible to stay angry, while Rose quietly refilled everyone's plates. One evening, 2 soldiers arrived after nearly coming to blows during an operation. The tension between them was obvious. Rose said nothing. She simply placed a large loaf of fresh bread between them. "Could one of you slice this for everyone?" The request seemed almost ridiculous. Yet 5 minutes later, the 2 men were discussing the correct way to cut bread without crushing the crust. By dessert, they were laughing. Neither ever remembered what had caused the original argument. Rose never asked about mafia business. never questioned operations, never offered opinions on power or strategy. She understood that world belonged to Vincent. Her world was different. It consisted of empty chairs that deserved to be filled, hungry people who deserved warm food, and lonely hearts that deserved a little kindness. Ironically, that quiet philosophy accomplished something violence never had. The Bellini estate became calmer. Even productivity improved. Drivers volunteered for extra shifts without complaint. Guards covered one another during emergencies. Maintenance requests finished faster. The chefs noticed leftovers decreasing because employees no longer skipped meals during stressful weeks. No one connected these changes to Rose. At least, not officially. One rainy evening, an elite bodyguard arrived carrying a birthday cake from a nearby bakery. Rose looked surprised. "Whose birthday is it?" "Yours." She laughed. "My birthday was yesterday." "We know. You forgot, because you spent all day helping everyone else." More than 20 employees crowded into the kitchen. Someone found candles. Someone began singing slightly off-key. For perhaps the first time since marrying into the Bellini family, Rose cried. Not because of sadness, because she finally felt included. The nickname appeared almost by accident. An older Sicilian capo finished dinner one night and watched Rose wrap extra food for a guard working the midnight gate. He smiled. "You remind me of my mother." Rose laughed. "I'll take that as a compliment." He nodded thoughtfully. "No, you remind all of us." The next evening he entered the kitchen carrying empty containers. "Evening, Mama Rose?" Everyone paused. The words felt strangely natural. Within days, the nickname spread through the estate. Not Mrs. Bellini, not Madam, not Boss's wife. Mama Rose. Not because she was old. Not because she had children, because she somehow cared for everyone, as though they already belonged. The title carried enormous respect. Among hardened mafia men, it was perhaps the greatest compliment anyone could receive. The remarkable part was how fiercely everyone protected the secret. One junior guard accidentally mentioned the evening meals while speaking near Vincent's office. 3 older soldiers nearly dragged him away before he finished the sentence. "Keep your voice down." "What? You don't talk about Mama Rose." "Why not? What if the boss shuts it down?" The young recruit frowned. Why would he? Nobody had an answer. Only fear. Rose's kitchen had become too precious to risk. Vincent valued order, schedules, security. If he believed dozens of armed men gathered unofficially every night, he might forbid it immediately. No one wanted to gamble with that possibility. So they made an unspoken agreement. Protect Mama Rose. Protect the kitchen. Protect the only place inside the estate that still felt like home. Even Vincent noticed subtle improvements around the mansion. Reports arrived earlier. Conflicts decreased. Employee turnover quietly dropped. The atmosphere seemed lighter. One afternoon he mentioned it during a meeting. "I haven't approved any morale initiatives." His chief financial officer shook his head. "No, boss." "Then why does everyone seem happier lately?" The room became strangely quiet. Several capos exchanged nervous glances. One cleared his throat. "We've all adjusted." Vincent accepted the explanation. He had larger concerns demanding his attention. Expanding territories, negotiating alliances, avoiding a potential conflict with a rival family. He never suspected that the strongest force improving his organization wasn't strategy. It wasn't fear. It wasn't money. It was a woman gently asking exhausted men whether they'd eaten enough. Only one person finally noticed the growing pattern. Vivian Moretti. She had spent decades managing every detail inside the Bellini estate. Nothing escaped her attention for long. One evening, while reviewing household expenses, she frowned. The kitchen inventory didn't make sense. Bread consumption had nearly doubled. Fresh herbs disappeared faster every week. Chicken stock orders had increased significantly. Yet official banquet schedules remained unchanged. Vivian closed the ledger. Her instincts sharpened. Someone was using the kitchens without her permission, and she intended to discover exactly who. Vivian Moretti had built her reputation on one principle. Nothing happened inside the Bellini estate without her knowing. For nearly 20 years, she had managed every banquet, every guest list, every household expense, and every member of the domestic staff with unwavering precision. So when the kitchen inventory no longer matched the official records, she knew someone was breaking her rules. She simply didn't expect the culprit to be Rose. The discovery came on an ordinary Tuesday evening. Vivian followed a young pantry assistant carrying 2 baskets of fresh bread toward the old service wing. Instead of entering the main dining hall, he disappeared through a narrow hallway leading to the forgotten kitchen. She stopped outside the door. Voices drifted into the corridor. Not shouting, laughing, real laughter. The kind she hadn't heard inside the mansion in years. Vivian slowly pushed the door open. The sight before her froze her in place. Nearly 30 people filled the small kitchen. Drivers, mechanics, gardeners, bodyguards, junior capos, even 2 senior enforcers whose names were known throughout New York. They sat shoulder to shoulder around mismatched tables. No rank, no hierarchy, no fear, only warm food and relaxed conversation. At the center stood Rose, her sleeves rolled up. A faint streak of flour rested on one cheek. She was serving homemade lasagna while asking one soldier how his mother's surgery had gone. Another thanked her for remembering his son's graduation. Someone else proudly showed pictures of a newborn granddaughter. Rose celebrated every story as though each one belonged to her own family. For several long seconds, nobody noticed Vivian standing in the doorway. Then silence swept across the room. Every chair scraped against the floor. The soldiers rose instinctively, not because Vivian had earned that respect, because they feared what she might do next. Vivian's expression hardened. So, this is where our missing food has been going. Nobody answered. She looked directly at Rose. I specifically instructed the staff that the Bellini kitchens were not to become a public cafeteria. Rose calmly placed the serving spoon onto the counter. I'm sorry. I didn't intend to create a problem. A problem. Vivian laughed coldly. You've turned the boss's residence into a servant's dining hall. The words hung heavily in the room. Several soldiers lowered their heads. Not out of shame for themselves, out of shame for Rose. One veteran stepped forward. Lady Vivian, we asked Mrs. Bellini to cook. Vivian cut him off immediately. I wasn't speaking to you. Her attention returned to Rose. A Bellini wife hosts dignitaries. She represents power. She does not spend evenings feeding guards. Rose answered softly. They were hungry. Vivian's smile became even thinner. That isn't your responsibility. No, Rose admitted. It wasn't. I simply thought someone should care. For the briefest moment, even Vivian had no reply. Then pride returned. Kindness without dignity becomes servitude. You are behaving like hired staff. The insult landed with deliberate precision. Every person in the room felt it. Rose did too. Yet she neither defended herself nor argued. She simply nodded once. I understand. The annual Bellini family dinner took place 3 nights later. Relatives from across the country filled the grand dining hall. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath enormous chandeliers. Professional chefs presented course after course with flawless timing. Everything looked magnificent. Nothing felt warm. Halfway through the evening, Vivian deliberately raised the subject. Our dear Rose has discovered a fascinating new hobby. Several relatives looked toward her. She spends her evenings cooking for security guards. A few guests chuckled politely. One elderly cousin raised an eyebrow. For the guards? Vivian nodded. Apparently, she believes that's an appropriate use of the Bellini name. Several uncomfortable whispers spread around the table. Rose quietly placed her fork down. She wasn't embarrassed by cooking. She was saddened by the way kindness had become something people mocked. Vincent glanced toward his wife. "You've been cooking?" Rose smiled gently. "A little." He looked genuinely confused. "You never mentioned it. You were busy." That simple answer unsettled him more than he expected. Before he could ask another question, Vivian continued, "I've already corrected the situation. The estate must maintain standards." Rose offered no defense. No explanation. No complaint. She simply finished her tea in silence. The following evening, the light beneath the little kitchen window never turned on. The soldiers waited anyway. 5 minutes. 10. 30. No one came. Eventually, the oldest capo quietly knocked on Rose's door. When she answered, she was still wearing an apron. Only, she wasn't cooking. "I'm sorry," she said before he could speak. "I think it's best if I stop." The veteran's shoulders dropped. "We understand." He didn't. None of them did. But they respected her decision. That night, everyone returned to the official dining hall. The food remained perfect. No one finished their meal. Within days, the Bellini estate began changing again. Only this time, in the opposite direction. The mechanics returned to eating alone. Drivers grabbed sandwiches and hurried back to work without conversation. Bodyguards once again stood silently at opposite ends of the security office. The laughter disappeared. Birthdays passed unnoticed. Coffee breaks ended after only a few minutes. The atmosphere felt colder than anyone remembered. No one argued. No one smiled either. The mansion had regained its efficiency, and somehow lost its heart. Vincent noticed first, during his weekly security briefing. The reports were correct. Operations remained successful. Yet something felt wrong. His chief of security answered every question with mechanical precision. Normally there would have been jokes, suggestions, friendly disagreements. Now there was only silence. After the meeting, Vincent stopped Marco in the hallway. "You seem tired." Marco forced a smile. "I'm fine, boss. You've said 3 words in the last hour." Marco looked away. "We're just working. We're just working." Vincent frowned. That wasn't an answer. Over the next several days, he observed more changes. The gardeners no longer sang while trimming the hedges. Kitchen staff hurried through their work with unusual tension. Even the estate dogs wandered toward the dark service kitchen each evening before eventually lying down outside its locked door. One night, Vincent passed the corridor himself. He noticed the small kitchen sitting in complete darkness. For reasons he couldn't explain, the empty room bothered him. Finally, during a late-night patrol review, he overheard 2 young recruits speaking quietly. "I miss Mama Rose." "So do I." "You think she'll ever cook again?" "I don't know. I just know this place doesn't feel like home anymore." Vincent stopped walking. The recruits immediately straightened. Neither realized their boss had heard every word. Vincent spoke calmly. "Who is Mama Rose?" Neither man answered. Fear spread across both faces. Vincent had commanded armies, negotiated with politicians, broken rival organizations. Yet somehow, 2 hardened recruits looked more frightened by that simple question than by any battlefield they had ever entered. At that moment, Vincent realized there was an entire part of his own household that he had never truly seen. Vincent Bellini had built his empire by learning one lesson before all others. People lied. Fear made them lie. Money made them lie. Ambition made them lie. But grief almost never did. The following morning, he asked the oldest veteran in the organization to meet him privately. The man entered Vincent's office with the calm confidence of someone who had survived 3 decades inside the mafia. He expected questions about security. Instead, Vincent asked only one: "Who is Mama Rose?" The veteran lowered his eyes. For several seconds he remained silent. Then he smiled. "Your wife." Vincent frowned. "I know she's my wife. I don't know why everyone calls her that." The veteran took a slow breath. "Boss, Mrs. Bellini never cooked because anyone ordered her to." He paused before continuing. "She cooked because she remembered birthdays. She knew whose parents had passed away. She knew which men secretly sent money home. She noticed who pretended not to be hurting." His voice softened. "Most of us forgot what it felt like to be cared for. She reminded us." Silence settled across the office. It was heavier than any confession Vincent had ever heard. Over the next 3 days, Vincent quietly spoke with employee after employee, not in groups, one at a time. He wanted separate stories. If they all sounded the same, perhaps sentiment had exaggerated the truth. Instead, every conversation revealed something new. Marco remembered arriving home after emergency surgery to find homemade soup waiting at his door with a handwritten note that simply read, "Recovery counts as work too." The mechanic described how Rose had secretly repaired his daughter's old bicycle by paying a local shop after overhearing a single conversation. An accountant admitted she had prepared sugar-free desserts every Friday after discovering he had recently been diagnosed with diabetes. A gardener smiled while recalling how Rose had spent an afternoon planting herbs beside the kitchen window because she wanted everyone to enjoy their fragrance when walking past. No one spoke about expensive gifts. No one mentioned grand gestures. Every story involved something small, something thoughtful, something deeply personal. Each ended exactly the same way. She never wanted recognition. Vincent leaned back in his chair after the final conversation. For years, he had believed loyalty could be purchased through generous salaries, maintained through discipline, protected through fear. Yet his wife had inspired something entirely different. People followed Vincent because they respected his strength. They loved Rose because she saw their humanity. For the first time since inheriting the Bellini syndicate, Vincent realized there was a form of leadership he had never understood. That realization arrived only days before the Bellini family anniversary banquet. The celebration was the largest gathering of the year. Capos traveled from every region. Business allies filled the ballroom. Politicians, judges, community leaders. Every important figure connected to the Bellini family attended. Rose almost declined the invitation. She no longer felt she belonged. But Vincent personally asked her to join him. His voice carried unusual warmth. "It would mean a great deal to me." She smiled gently. "Of course." The ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers. An orchestra played softly, while servers carried silver trays between elegant tables. Everything reflected prestige. Everything reflected power. Rose wore a simple, deep blue gown. She never tried to outshine anyone. Even so, many employees smiled the moment they saw her. Some nodded almost imperceptibly. Others simply looked relieved she had come. Vivian noticed every glance. Her irritation quietly returned. As dessert was served, she rose to address the room. "Before tonight concludes," she announced elegantly, "I'd like to thank everyone who continues preserving the traditions that made the Bellini name respected." Polite applause followed. Then her eyes drifted toward Rose. Of course, good intentions alone are never enough. A great family is built through dignity, not by serving meals to guards. A few uneasy chuckles echoed through the hall. Most people remained silent. Rose lowered her eyes. She had grown accustomed to Vivian's criticism. She expected Vincent to remain silent as he always had. Instead, his chair moved. Slowly, The sound echoed throughout the ballroom. Vincent Bellini stood. Every conversation stopped. He rarely spoke without purpose. When he finally did, his voice remained calm. "I have one question." He looked across the enormous hall. "Everyone who has ever been cared for by my wife, please stand." For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Marco rose. Beside him stood the elderly veteran. A mechanic followed. Then another. Drivers, gardeners, housekeepers, kitchen assistants, bodyguards, junior capos, senior capos, family advisors, even several respected allies who quietly admitted Rose had once comforted them after difficult meetings. Chair after chair slid backward. The movement spread across the ballroom like a rising tide. Within seconds, nearly the entire room stood. Only one chair remained occupied. Vivian's. She looked around in stunned disbelief. Not because people obeyed Vincent, because they would have stood, even if he had never asked. Rose covered her mouth. Tears filled her eyes. She hadn't realized. Anyone remembered. Vincent walked across the ballroom until he stood before his wife. Without speaking, he gently took her hand. His expression carried no embarrassment, only admiration. "I believed power held this empire together." He looked around the room. "I was wrong." His gaze returned to Rose. "You accomplished something I never could. You earned loyalty without fear. You built trust without demanding it. You gave this family something money cannot buy." His voice softened. "You gave us a home." The ballroom erupted into applause. Not polite applause. Heartfelt applause. Heartfelt applause. Someone near the back spoke the words everyone had hidden for months. "Mama Rose." Another voice repeated them. Then another. Within moments, the entire ballroom echoed with the same title. "Mama Rose, Mama Rose, Mama Rose." It was not a joke. It was not a nickname. It was the highest honor those hardened men knew how to give. Rose smiled through tears. For the first time since entering the Bellini family, she finally believed she belonged there. In the weeks that followed, change came naturally. Vivian requested a private meeting with Rose. There were no witnesses, no audience, only two women seated across from one another. "I judged you by appearances," Vivian admitted quietly. "I believed strength looked a certain way." She lowered her head. "I was mistaken." Rose reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. "We all learn differently. No anger, no revenge, only grace." Within a month, Vivian stepped away from managing the estate, recommending younger staff members continue her work with greater openness than she herself had shown. Vincent made changes of his own. An unused wing of the mansion was transformed into a permanent family dining hall. Not a luxurious banquet room, a welcoming place filled with long wooden tables, warm lighting, and an open kitchen where anyone, from the newest recruit to the oldest capo, could share a meal together. Rose insisted the doors remain open to everyone. Vincent never argued. He had learned that some decisions belonged to the true heart of the household. Several months later, a nervous young recruit entered the dining hall for the first time. He watched battle-hardened veterans laughing over homemade bread, while Rose moved between tables carrying bowls of steaming soup. Confused, he whispered to an older capo, "Why does everyone smile whenever Mrs. Bellini walks in?" The capo looked toward Vincent, who was quietly helping Rose carry fresh dishes to the table. Then he smiled. "Boss Vincent built the strongest empire in America." He nodded toward Rose. "But Mrs. Bellini built the family that keeps it standing." Vincent overheard every word. Without hesitation, he wrapped one arm proudly around his wife's shoulders. Then, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, he said, And that's why every empire needs a queen. The room filled with warm laughter. Rose looked around the table. Soldiers, servants, advisors, friends, family. People who once shared nothing except fear, now shared stories, meals, birthdays, and hope. Her grandfather had been right all along. Every great meal began by making people feel seen. And in the end, the most feared mafia boss in America discovered that the greatest strength inside his empire had never been power, wealth, or intimidation. It had always been the quiet love of the plus side. Nobody inside the Moretti estate understood why Damien Moretti was in such a terrible mood. By 10 o'clock that morning, 3 bodyguards had already been reassigned to warehouse duty after making minor mistakes. One trusted captain had nearly lost his position for interrupting a meeting half a second too early. A negotiation involving an $8 million shipping contract had been postponed because Damien abruptly walked out before anyone finished speaking. The mansion had fallen into complete silence. Staff whispered only when absolutely necessary. Footsteps became softer. Doors closed more carefully. Even the chefs lowered their voices in the kitchen. Everyone assumed someone had betrayed the Moretti family. After all, Damien Moretti wasn't known for losing his temper without reason. He was known for something far worse: control. The man had once negotiated with rival syndicates while a gun was pointed at his chest, without changing the tone of his voice. He had buried enemies without blinking. He had stared down federal investigations with the same calm expression he used while drinking his morning espresso. Fear simply wasn't an emotion people associated with Damien Moretti. Until today. Inside his office, another expensive fountain pen cracked between his fingers. Marco DeSantis, Damien's longtime underboss, quietly glanced at the broken pieces before pretending not to notice. No one commented. No one breathed louder than necessary. Damien stared through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the estate grounds, but he wasn't seeing the gardens. He was seeing an empty breakfast chair. Every morning for nearly 3 years, someone had walked into his study carrying black coffee, fresh bread still warm from the oven, and exactly 2 slices of orange because his physician insisted he needed more vitamins. Every morning, she reminded him to eat. Every morning he ignored her. Every morning she ignored his refusal and quietly placed the plate where he couldn't avoid seeing it. Eventually, he always ate. Not because he was hungry. Because she would smile whenever she returned later and found the plate empty. It had become such an ordinary routine that Damien had stopped questioning why the highlight of his mornings involved homemade bread baked by one of the estate's maids. Until this morning. She had been strangely quiet. No teasing reminder about his medication. No gentle argument over coffee. No fresh loaf cooling on the kitchen counter. And for reasons he refused to examine too closely. The entire estate suddenly felt colder. A soft knock interrupted the suffocating silence. 3 measured taps. Marco looked toward the door. "So?" A timid voice answered from outside. "Sir, may I come in?" Something shifted in Damien's expression. Barely noticeable. But Marco saw it. So it's her, he thought. "Come in." The heavy oak door opened slowly. Hannah Brooks stepped inside, carrying a neatly organized stack of housekeeping reports against her chest. She wore the same simple uniform she had worn almost every day for 3 years. Her soft brown hair was tied into a loose bun. A few stubborn curls framed her round face. Her gentle smile appeared almost apologetic, as though she were worried about interrupting people far more important than herself. She thanked every gardener by name, remembered every employee's birthday, brought soup to 6 security guards without telling anyone. Half the estate quietly believed she was the kindest person living behind the mansion walls. The other half secretly wondered how someone so warm had survived 3 years working for Damien Moretti. She stopped a respectful distance from the desk. "I'm sorry for interrupting." Damien finally looked at her. "What is it?" "I finished organizing tomorrow's guest rooms." He nodded once. "The inventory reports are updated." Another nod. "The kitchen requested approval for next week's grocery order." Marco blinked. 5 minutes ago, Damien had nearly exploded because someone spoke during a meeting. Now he was patiently listening to grocery updates. Nobody dared react. Hannah hesitated. She shifted her weight nervously. "There is one more thing," Damien noticed immediately. She almost never hesitated. "What?" She lowered her eyes. "I was wondering." Her fingers tightened slightly around the folder. If it wouldn't cause too much trouble. Marco suddenly found the carpet fascinating. Every instinct told him this conversation mattered far more than the business meeting waiting downstairs. Hannah took a slow breath. "I may need to leave work an hour early today." The room became completely still. Damien rested both hands on the desk. "For what reason?" A faint blush warmed Hannah's cheeks. She smiled. Small, shy, almost embarrassed. "My best friend finally convinced me to meet someone." She laughed softly. "It's only dinner." Another tiny pause. "I have a date tonight." Silence. A sharp crack echoed through the office. Everyone looked down. Damien's fountain pen had snapped cleanly in half. Dark ink slowly spread across the polished mahogany desk. No one moved. Marco had watched this man survive ambushes. He had watched him negotiate peace between families who had spent decades trying to kill each other. He had never seen Damien Moretti stare at a broken pen as though it had personally betrayed him. When Damien finally spoke, his voice was calm. Far too calm. "A date." "Yes." "With whom?" Hannah smiled apologetically. "I actually don't know much about him yet. My friend Lucy arranged everything. They've only spoken online." Marco's stomach tightened. Damien's jaw flexed once. "You've never met this man?" "No. And you're planning to have dinner alone with him. I know it sounds a little old-fashioned." She laughed again. "But Lucy says he's very kind." For several long seconds, Damien said nothing. His expression remained unreadable. Only Marco noticed the subtle whitening of Damien's knuckles as his hand slowly closed around the broken pen. Then Damien leaned back. "You may leave early." Relief instantly brightened Hannah's face. "Thank you, sir." She turned and quietly left the office. The door clicked shut. Nobody spoke. Nobody dared. Finally, Damien looked toward Marco. "Find out everything." Marco frowned. "About the restaurant?" Damien's eyes turned colder than winter. "No. About the man who thinks he's taking Hannah Brooks to dinner." Marco understood immediately. This was no longer about a blind date. Somewhere deep inside, the city's most feared mafia boss had just declared war against a man whose name he didn't even know yet. The office remained silent long after Hannah left. Marco waited. He had worked beside Damien Moretti for nearly 15 years. He knew better than to speak first when his boss wore that expression. Damien slowly wiped the spilled ink from his desk with a folded handkerchief. His movements were precise, controlled. Anyone walking into the room would think nothing had happened. Only Marco noticed the tiny fragments of the shattered fountain pen still embedded in Damien's palm. A thin line of blood ran across his fingers. He didn't seem to notice. Finally, Damien spoke. "Gabriel." The head of intelligence appeared almost instantly from the adjoining office. Unlike the armed captains who commanded soldiers, Gabriel Russo commanded information. If something existed inside the city, Gabriel could usually find it. "You called, boss." Damien nodded once. "I need everything on a man." Gabriel pulled out a tablet. "Name?" "I don't have one." "Occupation?" "I don't know." "Address?" "No." Gabriel looked up. What do we have? Damien's voice remained calm. He has dinner with Hannah Brooks tonight. Gabriel blinked. Marco lowered his head to hide the smile threatening to appear. After a brief pause, Gabriel carefully asked, "Is this an official security concern?" Damien answered without hesitation, "It is now." Within seconds, Gabriel began issuing encrypted messages. Restaurant reservation databases, private investigators, facial recognition alerts, transportation records. Every available resource quietly shifted toward finding one completely ordinary man. Meanwhile, Hannah had absolutely no idea. She hummed softly while changing the linens in the guest wing. One of the younger housekeepers, Olivia Hayes, watched her with a grin. "You've smiled all morning." Hannah laughed. "Have I?" "You definitely have." Olivia leaned against the doorway. "So?" "So what? Tell me everything." "There isn't much to tell. You have a date." Hannah covered her face with both hands. "Please don't say it so loudly." Olivia laughed. "I've worked here 2 years and have never seen you interested in anyone." "I'm not interested." "Then why are you going?" Hannah carefully folded the final blanket. "Lucy says I spend too much time working." "She's probably right." And she thinks I deserve at least one nice evening." Olivia smiled warmly. "I agree." Hannah looked around the enormous guest suite. Sometimes she forgot how unusual her life had become. 3 years earlier, she had accepted the housekeeping position simply because it offered stable income and housing. She expected cold employers, strict schedules, luxury beyond anything she had ever imagined. She certainly hadn't expected Damien Moretti. The newspapers described him as ruthless. Television called him dangerous. Business magazines labeled him untouchable. But the man she saw every day looked lonely. He worked before sunrise. He often skipped lunch. He answered emails during dinner. Half the time she doubted he even noticed how exhausted he looked. Someone had to remind him to slow down. Eventually, that someone became her. At first, she reminded him because she was doing her job. Then, because nobody else would. She smiled to herself. He'll probably forget dinner again tonight. Olivia noticed. "What are you smiling about now?" "Oh, nothing." Across the estate, Damien stood inside the mansion's private security room. Dozens of surveillance monitors covered one wall. Most displayed gates, warehouses, loading docks, and shipping facilities. One screen showed the mansion's main kitchen. Hannah crossed the room, carrying a tray of freshly baked bread. She stopped to hand a warm roll to one of the gardeners before continuing on her way. Damien watched in silence. Marco quietly stepped beside him. "You know, this is becoming slightly obsessive." Damien never looked away. "She's too trusting." Marco folded his arms. "Or maybe she's simply kind. Kind people die first." Marco sighed. "There it is. The mafia answer." Damien finally turned. "You disagree? I think you're looking for reasons." Damien's eyes narrowed. "What reasons?" "To convince yourself this has something to do with security." Neither man spoke for several seconds. Then Gabriel entered carrying a tablet. "I found him." Both men looked up immediately. The restaurant reservation was made through Lucy Bennett. He placed the tablet on the table. The date's name is Ethan Cross, 32 years old. Claims to work in international logistics. No criminal record. No outstanding warrants. No financial irregularities. Marco raised an eyebrow. "So, clean." Gabriel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he enlarged several photographs. "Too clean." Damien understood instantly. "What did you find?" "Ethan Cross doesn't exist before 18 months ago." Marco frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean exactly that." Gabriel zoomed into several government databases. Driver's license issued 18 months ago. Tax history begins 18 months ago. Employment history begins 18 months ago. No childhood. No university records. No medical files. No photographs before that date. Marco's smile disappeared. A manufactured identity. Gabriel nodded. Professional grade. Damien stared at Ethan's smiling photograph. Average height. Well-dressed. Pleasant smile. Exactly the kind of man nobody remembered seeing, which made him dangerous. Gabriel continued. I kept digging. The identity traces back to a consulting firm. The consulting firm belongs to a holding company. The holding company? He stopped. Damien finished the sentence himself. Belongs to Victor Salvatore. Gabriel nodded. The rival syndicate. The room grew silent. Victor Salvatore had spent years trying to penetrate Moretti operations. He bribed politicians, bought shipping inspectors, placed informants inside construction companies, but never inside the mansion itself. Marco slowly exhaled. You think Hannah is the target? Damien shook his head. No, she's the doorway. At that exact moment, miles away in a quiet apartment, Hannah stood in front of her bedroom mirror. Lucy Bennett adjusted the collar of Hannah's soft blue dress. You look beautiful. I look nervous. That's normal. What if he doesn't like me? Lucy laughed. If he has functioning eyes, he'll like you. Hannah smiled shyly. I haven't been on a date in years. Lucy hugged her. Then tonight is the beginning of something wonderful. Neither woman noticed the black luxury sedan parked across the street. Inside, a man wearing an earpiece quietly lowered his binoculars. He pressed a single button. Target is preparing to leave. A cold voice answered through the speaker. Excellent. Phase 1 begins tonight. The early evening sky glowed with soft shades of gold as Hannah stepped out of the apartment building. She paused on the sidewalk and took a slow breath. It had been years since she had dressed for anything other than work. The blue dress Lucy had chosen wasn't expensive. It was simple, comfortable, elegant, in a quiet way. For the first time in a long while, Hannah looked at her reflection in the glass door and smiled. Maybe tonight would simply be normal. Lucy squeezed her arm. Stop worrying. I'm trying. No thinking about laundry. No worrying whether Mr. Moretti remembered dinner. No wondering if someone folded the guest towels correctly. Hannah laughed. I don't think like that. Lucy raised an eyebrow. You absolutely do. Hannah opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. Perhaps she was right. For 3 years, the estate had become her world. She knew every hallway, every employee, every gardener, every cook. She even knew which lights Damien preferred left on when he worked late into the night. Without realizing it, his routines had quietly become part of hers. Across the city, Damien stood beside a black SUV parked opposite the restaurant. Marco leaned against the vehicle with folded arms. This is your final chance. Damien didn't answer. You could still leave. Silence. Marco sighed. You know what a normal man would do. Damien looked at him. He'd admit he's jealous. I am not jealous. Marco almost laughed. You postponed an $8 million contract. You ordered background investigations on a stranger. You've placed surveillance around a restaurant. And you haven't blinked in 20 minutes. If this isn't jealousy, I'd hate to see what is. Damien's expression remained unreadable. I protect people under my roof. Marco smiled knowingly. Only one of them. Before Damien could respond, Gabriel's voice came through the earpiece. Boss, Ethan has arrived. Damien looked toward the restaurant entrance. A silver sedan stopped beside the curb. A tall man stepped out. Perfectly tailored suit, relaxed smile. confident posture. Nothing about Ethan Cross appeared threatening. That bothered Damien even more. Professional predators rarely looked dangerous. They looked trustworthy. Inside the restaurant, Hannah stood as Ethan approached. "You must be Hannah." His smile seemed warm. She smiled back politely. "And you must be Ethan. It's nice to finally meet you." He pulled out her chair before taking his own seat. For the next 20 minutes, everything seemed perfectly ordinary. He asked about her hobbies. She spoke about baking. He laughed at her stories about accidentally burning cookies during her first week at the estate. She admitted she loved gardening. He claimed he did too. Outside, Gabriel quietly handed Damien a tablet. "I found something." Damien glanced down. Security footage. Different cities. Different women. Ethan appeared beside each of them. Always smiling. Always charming. Always disappearing several weeks later. Marco frowned. "Who are they?" Gabriel answered softly. "Employees. Executive assistants. Receptionists. Bookkeepers. Women working close to powerful businessmen." Damien's eyes darkened. "A pattern." Gabriel nodded. "We've confirmed 6. There could be more." Inside, the waiter arrived carrying dinner. Hannah relaxed a little. Maybe Lucy had been right. Maybe she had worried for nothing. Ethan listened carefully whenever she spoke. He complimented her baking, asked thoughtful questions, never interrupted. He seemed kind. Then came one small question. "So, you work at the Moretti estate?" Hannah smiled. "Yes, it must be beautiful." "It really is." "How many people live there?" She hesitated. "I'm not really supposed to discuss work." Ethan immediately raised both hands. "Of course. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry." His apology felt sincere. Hannah smiled again. No harm done. Across the room, a man sitting alone lowered his newspaper. Tiny camera hidden inside a button. Microphone concealed beneath the table. Every word had been recorded. He quietly texted one sentence. "Target is comfortable. Proceed to phase 2. Minutes later, Ethan casually continued the conversation. "I always admire people who work for successful families. It must be fascinating." Hannah shrugged. "It's mostly cleaning. Cooking. Helping wherever I'm needed. And Mr. Moretti." She looked surprised. "What about him? Is he really as intimidating as people say?" Hannah smiled despite herself. "He can be. But—" She stopped. "But what?" She looked down at her tea. "I think people misunderstand him." Outside, Damien froze. Marco slowly turned toward him. "Did she just defend you?" Damien didn't answer. His eyes never left the restaurant window. Inside, Ethan leaned forward with genuine interest. "So he's actually a good man?" Hannah considered the question carefully. "I don't know if good is the right word. But I've seen him pay medical bills for employees without telling anyone. I've seen him attend funerals when workers lost family members. I've seen him remember birthdays he pretended not to care about. He hides it. But he's kinder than people realize." For the first time all evening, Damien lowered his eyes. Marco smiled quietly. "She sees you." Before Damien could respond, Gabriel's phone vibrated sharply. His expression changed instantly. "What?" Marco noticed first. "What happened?" Gabriel turned the screen toward Damien. Satellite tracking. Encrypted messages. Known associates. One photograph. Victor Salvatore's chief lieutenant, entering an underground parking garage beneath the restaurant. 10 minutes earlier. Damien's voice dropped into the cold tone his men feared most. "He's here." Gabriel nodded. "Our surveillance team just lost visual. This was never just Ethan." Damien opened the SUV door, Move. Inside the restaurant, Hannah laughed as Ethan told another story. She never noticed the waiter, who wasn't really a waiter. He quietly placed a fresh glass of sparkling water in front of her. His sleeve brushed the rim for less than a second, almost invisible. Then he walked away. Ethan looked down. A tiny smile flickered across his face, before disappearing just as quickly. Across the street, Damien stepped onto the sidewalk. Then he stopped. Through the restaurant window, he watched Hannah reach toward the untouched glass. At that exact moment, Gabriel shouted into his earpiece, "Boss, don't let her drink it. Boss, don't let her drink it." Gabriel's warning exploded through Damien's earpiece. For a split second, the world seemed to freeze. Through the restaurant window, Damien watched Hannah wrap her fingers around the sparkling water. She smiled politely at Ethan as she lifted the glass. Damien didn't think. He moved. The restaurant doors burst open so violently that every conversation inside stopped. Heads turned. Forks froze halfway to mouths. The pianist in the corner missed 3 notes before falling silent. Damien Moretti strode through the dining room with the controlled urgency of a man who had already calculated every possible outcome. His dark coat swept behind him. Marco and 2 security men entered seconds later, silently sealing every exit. Most of the guests recognized him immediately. Whispers spread through the room. "That's Damien Moretti. Why is he here?" "What happened?" Hannah looked up in surprise. "Sir?" Before she could stand, Damien reached the table. Without saying a single word, he took the glass from her hand. He smelled it once, then calmly poured the water into a nearby decorative flower pot. Within seconds, the plant's leaves began to curl. The stem darkened. A waitress screamed. The restaurant erupted into chaos. Hannah stared at the dying plant in disbelief. "What?" Damien turned toward Ethan. His expression was colder than winter. "You came prepared." Ethan remained seated. To his credit, he didn't panic. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "No?" Damien placed a small evidence bag on the table. Inside lay a nearly invisible dissolvable capsule. "Our chemists found an identical capsule inside the serving tray used by your waiter." The fake smile disappeared from Ethan's face. Marco quietly addressed the stunned restaurant manager. "Please ask everyone to remain calm. This is now a private security matter." Several guests immediately stood to leave. The security team politely, but firmly, blocked the exits. No one argued. Not after seeing the dead plant. Hannah slowly looked between Damien and Ethan. Confusion flooded her face. "Ethan, what's happening?" Ethan sighed. Then, he smiled. A completely different smile. Cold. Calculated. "So, I suppose the evening is over." Hannah's stomach tightened. "You knew?" He shrugged. "I knew enough." Damien stepped between them. "You used her." Ethan laughed quietly. "I preferred the word recruited." "I never intended to hurt her." "No." Damien's voice hardened. "You intended to use her until she became disposable." Hannah shook her head. "No. This doesn't make sense." "I don't know anything." "Exactly," Ethan replied. "You didn't. You were simply the easiest path into the Moretti estate." Every color drained from Hannah's face. "My friend, Lucy?" Ethan nodded. "We approached her 6 months ago. She believed she was helping you meet someone nice. She never knew who we really were." Tears immediately filled Hannah's eyes. She was tricked too." "Yes," Damien answered before Ethan could. "Victor Salvatore specializes in manipulating ordinary people. They create fake identities, manufacture trust." "And wait." Hannah slowly lowered herself back into her chair. Everything suddenly made sense. The coincidence, the perfect conversation, the strangely specific questions about the estate. She had nearly answered them. She almost helped them. Not because she was careless, because she honestly believed someone had simply wanted to know her. A tear rolled down her cheek. I was so stupid. No. Damien's answer came instantly. You were kind. There is a difference. She looked up at him. For just a moment, the restaurant disappeared. The frightened guests. The armed guards. The rival operative. None of it mattered. She saw only Damien, standing between her and danger without a second's hesitation. Ethan slowly rose from his chair. You know, I almost feel bad. Damien didn't move. You should. Ethan chuckled. Do you know what surprised me most? You. He looked directly at Damien. Our reports described you as cold, strategic, impossible to provoke. But all we had to do, he glanced toward Hannah, was invite your maid to dinner. The room fell silent. Even Marco looked toward Damien. Ethan smiled wider. You've been in love with her for a very long time. Damien said nothing. He didn't deny it. That silence told everyone everything. Hannah's eyes widened. She stared at Damien as though seeing him for the first time. Ethan laughed. I spent months studying your organization. I never found your weakness. Turns out, it wasn't your shipping routes. It wasn't your money. It wasn't your soldiers. It was the woman who baked your bread every Sunday. Several diners exchanged shocked glances. Marco slowly closed his eyes. So that's how the entire city finds out. Damien took one deliberate step forward. You've said enough. At that moment, 3 men, wearing restaurant uniforms, suddenly reached beneath their jackets. Weapons. The diners screamed. Before the first pistol cleared its holster, Marco tackled one attacker across a table. Gabriel disarmed another with a precise strike to the wrist. Damien moved faster than Hannah could follow. He grabbed her chair and pulled it behind him, shielding her completely with his own body. The third attacker hesitated. His weapon pointed directly at Damien. No one breathed. Then, dozens of red laser dots appeared across the man's chest. The restaurant windows shattered inward. Moretti security had surrounded the entire building. The attacker slowly dropped his gun. It's over, Gabriel said. Within moments, police sirens echoed outside. Victor Salvatore's operation had collapsed. Ethan was handcuffed without resistance. As officers escorted him away, he looked back one final time. You won tonight, Moretti. But ask yourself one question. If she never told you about this date, would you ever have admitted how much she meant to you? The doors closed behind him. Silence returned. Hannah remained standing beside the table. Her hands trembled. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was overwhelmed. She looked at Damien. So, you followed me? Marco quietly muttered. Here we go. Damien answered honestly. Yes. You investigated Ethan? Yes. You had people watching me? Yes. Hannah took one slow step backward. Pain replaced confusion. You didn't trust me. Damien's expression changed for the first time all evening. It was never about trusting you. But I didn't know that. Her voice cracked. You could have told me. You could have warned me. Instead, you watched. She shook her head. I thought tonight was about finally letting someone into my life. She swallowed hard. I didn't realize everyone else already knew more about it than I did. With tears threatening to fall, Hannah turned and walked toward the restaurant exit. Damien instinctively stepped after her, then stopped. For perhaps the first time in years, the most powerful man in the city realized there was one battle no amount of money, influence, or force could win. The battle for the heart of the woman he had just protected. The Moretti estate had never felt so quiet. Not because the staff were afraid, because someone was missing. 3 days had passed since the incident at the restaurant. The rival syndicate's operation had collapsed. Victor Salvatore's network had suffered its worst intelligence failure in years. Ethan Cross had accepted a plea agreement in exchange for testimony. The immediate danger was over, yet Damien felt no sense of victory. Every morning he still walked into his study before sunrise. Every morning a fresh cup of coffee waited on his desk. One of the housekeepers faithfully prepared it. It tasted exactly the same. But somehow, it wasn't right. The bread came from the estate kitchen, perfectly baked, perfectly warm, yet Damien left it untouched. Marco eventually walked into the study, carrying several documents. "You've ignored breakfast 3 days in a row. I'm busy. You've signed the same contract twice." Damien looked down. Marco was right. His signature appeared on both pages. Something he had never done before. Marco gently placed the paperwork aside. "You should go see her." Damien stared out the window. "I already frightened her once. If I push again, I'll lose her completely." Marco smiled. "You know what I find interesting?" Damien raised an eyebrow. "You've negotiated peace treaties between criminal families. You've stared down judges. You've survived assassination attempts. But one disappointed housemaid," he chuckled softly, "has completely defeated Damien Moretti. For the first time in days." Damien smiled. Only briefly. Meanwhile, Hannah sat inside a small neighborhood bakery. The comforting smell of fresh cinnamon surrounded her. Lucy stirred her coffee nervously. "I'm so sorry." Hannah reached across the table and squeezed her friend's hand. "This wasn't your fault. I should have checked." "No." Hannah shook her head. "They fooled both of us." Lucy hesitated. "So, what are you going to do now?" Hannah looked out the window. "I don't know. I miss the estate. I miss everyone." She stopped. Lucy smiled knowingly. "And?" Hannah looked down at her untouched tea. "I miss him." The words surprised even her. She remembered every small moment she had dismissed over the years. The mornings he quietly finished breakfast, after insisting he wasn't hungry. The evenings he pretended not to notice the fresh bread waiting outside his office. The winter afternoon, he silently draped his own coat across her shoulders when the heating system failed. The birthday gift that had arrived anonymously, a set of professional baking tools she had admired months earlier. She had always assumed someone from the kitchen purchased them. Now, she wasn't so sure. Back at the estate, Gabriel entered Damien's office carrying an old cardboard box. "We found this while reorganizing storage." Damien looked inside. Small, handwritten recipe cards. Every loaf of bread Hannah had baked over the past 3 years. Each recipe carried notes. "Less salt." "Boss actually finished this one." "Try rosemary next Sunday." Another card read, "He looked tired today. Add extra honey. Maybe he'll eat more." Damien carefully picked up the final card. The handwriting was smaller, almost hidden in one corner. "I wish he'd stop pretending he has to carry everything alone." For a long moment, he simply stood there. Then he quietly closed the box. "Prepare the car." An hour later, the bell above the bakery door chimed softly. Hannah looked up. Every conversation inside stopped. Damien Moretti stood in the doorway. No bodyguards, no convoy, no expensive overcoat. Just one man carrying a plain brown paper bag. He walked toward her table. "May I sit?" She nodded. For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, Damien placed the paper bag on the table. Inside lay one slightly burnt loaf of bread. Hannah blinked. "You baked this?" "I tried." A tiny laugh escaped her despite everything. "It's terrible." "I know." It collapsed. The crust is uneven. And I may have confused sugar with salt. She smiled wider. I can tell. Damien looked directly into her eyes. I finally understood something. When you weren't there, the mansion kept running. The business kept growing. The money kept coming. He paused, but it stopped feeling like home. Hannah's smile slowly faded. He continued quietly. I thought I was protecting an employee. I was lying to myself. I was protecting the woman I couldn't imagine losing. His voice remained calm, yet every word carried absolute honesty. I wasn't angry because you had a date. I was terrified. Terrified that someone else might discover what I realized too late. He took a slow breath. That somewhere between your reminders to take my medication, your arguments over breakfast, and every loaf of bread you quietly left outside my office. I fell in love with you. The bakery fell completely silent. Even the barista stopped pretending not to listen. Hannah felt tears fill her eyes. You should have told me. I know. I was afraid. She laughed softly through her tears. The most feared man in the city was afraid? Damien smiled. Only of one woman. She stood, walked around the table, then wrapped her arms around him. Not because he was powerful, not because he had rescued her, because for the first time, he had allowed himself to be vulnerable. She rested her forehead against his. I don't need a bodyguard. I don't need a mansion. I don't need a mafia boss. I only need the man who secretly ate my bread every Sunday. Damien laughed. A genuine laugh, one his employees had almost never heard. Several months later, the Moretti estate looked exactly the same. The gardens bloomed. The staff hurried through familiar hallways. Fresh bread filled the kitchen with its comforting aroma. Only one thing had changed. During the annual charity gala, reporters gathered outside the mansion gates. One journalist asked the inevitable question. Mr. Moretti, there have been rumors. Who is the woman standing beside you? Damien looked toward Hannah. She was no longer wearing a maid's uniform. Instead, she stood confidently in an elegant midnight blue dress. Still smiling with the same warmth that had first transformed his lonely mornings. Damien gently took her hand. His answer was simple. This is Hannah Brooks. He smiled proudly. The woman who taught me that fear isn't losing an empire. It's losing the person who makes coming home worth it. The cameras flashed. The estate staff applauded. Marco quietly whispered to Gabriel, I told him he was jealous. Gabriel smirked. You told him on day one. Hannah laughed. Damien kissed her forehead. And for the first time in many years, the most feared mansion in the city finally became a home. If you enjoyed this story of unexpected love, hidden danger, and the courage to open one's heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. We'd love to hear in the comments. At what moment did you realize Damien wasn't protecting an employee anymore?